everyone, I'm Rebecca and welcome back to my sewing room. Today I want to talk to you about 1920s corsets. Now, I think there's probably a pretty common misconception about the idea that women in the 1920s did not wear corsets and that it was all about getting rid of, the terrible, uncomfortable corsetry and just freeing your body so that you could be loose and free and easy and a flapper and all of this other stuff that is totally not true, but that media feeds us all of the time. Women in the 1920s did wear corsets. Maybe not all women, but a lot of women in the 1920s did wear corsets. And frankly, 1920s corsets are not that different from 19-teens corsets. In particular, stout women, in other words, plus size women, since that's what they were called then, they really depended on corsets because if you think about the 1920s silhouette, it is extremely flat and extremely slim, just straight from top to bottom, no curves allowed, that sort of thing. And so a corset in the 1920s, it's not what you think of as like a Victorian corset where it really nips in the waist and brings out the bust and accentuates the hips. That's not what 1920s corsetry is about. But women still need aids under their clothing to assist them in achieving that very, very straight and boyish silhouette. And that is where the corset comes in. So similar to the 19-teens, what you see in the 1920s are underbust corsets. And they go from below the bust, somewhere like around in this area, and they go all the way down to over the hips because the idea was to slim the hips. You want really no curve on your hips. And that's what these corsets did. They did not nip in the waist, they just nipped in the hips. So in a way, it's really kind of, you see the transition from the corsets of the 19-teens and the 1920s into the girdles of like later in the century, mid-century even and later. And frankly, into modern day Spanx. So what I have for you here today is what I believe to be an early 1920s corset. Now, despite all of the information that I have about this corset, like tags, a style number, the brand, etc., I'm having a really, really hard time putting an exact pinpoint on this corset. So if your Google Foo is better than my Google Foo and you're able to find out like when exactly this corset is from, please do leave that below in the comments because I would love to know. I have spent a couple of hours at least trying to go through all of Google, literally searching the label and the name and the manufacturer and the style number by year and coming up with nothing. What I did come up with though is this advertisement right here. And in this advertisement, which is from 1922, we see a lot of similar looking corsets to the corset that I have in my collection. And the really cool thing about this corset that I have that I'm about to show you is that it is a corset for a stout lady. Now, when I bought this corset, I could wear it. It's been about 30 pounds since then. I don't really feel safe in wearing this corset because I could only just fit in it then, and I don't want to tax something that is literally 100 years old if this is actually from 1922. Crazy to think about that is 100 years old, isn't it? So this is our beautiful corset right here. And like that advertisement, you can see that it's in this sort of like pale pink, fleshy, peachy pink color. And some of the other things that are similar to that ad are the shape of it, the lacing up the back, the busk up the front, the elastic panels, etc. So there's not a lot to this corset, but I want to take you on a nice close-up look so that you can see what this corset looks like. I wish I could put it on for you. I'll see if I can put it on a dress form because it's going to be too big for my little dress form and too small for my big dress form. So we'll see how that goes. But you can see that really there's not a lot of difference from the waist area up here to the hip area down there. And we will go and we'll talk about measurements as well and look at it with a ruler. But for now, let's go ahead, take a close look at this corset and see how it's constructed. This is our lovely little lady here. Now, for the sake of showing you measurements, I have laced it all the way closed. We're looking at the front right here, top up here, bottom down here, and approximately right here where I've put this measuring tape, that is where I believe the approximate natural waist should be. Though, of course, the 1920s is all about not showing a waist, so frankly, it doesn't really matter. But you can see right up here at the top, we have elasticated panels going on, and I believe those elasticated panels are where we leave the waist and go up to the rib cage so that it gets a little bit larger and a little bit looser, so it's not so much compression on your rib cage. So that is why I believe this line right about here to be the natural waist, and this measures 16 inches across for a 32-inch natural waist. Now, that said, there's a lot of extra lacing here when you lace it all the way closed, so I am pretty darn certain that this would never really have been worn all the way closed, because just why would you have this much extra lacing? I do believe that this is the original lace. Why would you have this if you were to lace it all the way closed? You just don't need this much. So most likely this lady would have had probably a 2 to 4 inch gap of lacing. I haven't measured it out to see, with this much lacing, what makes sense gap wise, but most likely a 2 to 4 inch gap. And so probably around like a 34 to 36 inch waist is the waist that this lady should have had. I believe when I first bought this corset and I was kind of at my slimmest, I was about a 38 inch waist and it just barely fit, but I don't think that was what it was meant to be. Now, if we move our measuring tape down a little bit lower, this is probably about the widest part of the hips down here. You can actually see right here where the only curve that we're really getting when we're laying this flat is that it's actually curving in down here at the bottom. So that's why I believe that this is coming down below the widest part of the hips down here at the bottom. And so right here at the widest, we're looking at probably about a 19 inch or 38 inch hip size here. So again, not much difference between the hips and the waist. However, we do also get some elasticated panels down here over the hips. You can see these little gussets right here. These are elastic and they still do hold their stretch, which is really awesome after 100 years. Likewise, these guys up here still have quite a bit of stretch left in them too. Now, the interesting thing looking at the top ones here is that we do actually have boning channels that go through and into the elastic, whereas down here they just act as little gussets. This is a single layer corset. It is made out of a cotton. Most likely, I would assume that this is a cotton coutil. That said, I don't have a ton of experience with coutil, but if I remember correctly, it does feel like this. It's kind of a thinner, like twill weight fabric, but you don't see the ribs of the twill, the diagonal ribs. And what we're looking at here is we have a busk that ends right here. So it goes from the top to here, but then you see that there's still more room below. So the busk, we have, it actually gets wider as it goes down at the bottom. And then down here, we don't have a busk because you're sitting, you need to be able to bend. So this right here, we just have hooks and they're actually put on backwards so that the hook faces out and can go into the sort of eye over here that way. And I guess that means it's probably just a little bit more secure and you also wouldn't have the hook potentially poking you inside. So probably a little bit easier to do up as well. But that is how the bottom closes, whereas the top has that busk with the 5 little studs in it. It's fairly heavily boned. None of the boning channels are torn or anything, so I haven't looked to see what the boning material is, but it feels to me like it is a flat steel. Like it feels quite sturdy, but also flexible. And I don't think by this era that they were still using baleen. I could be wrong. If you know better, please do let me know in the comments, but I'm not gonna open up any of these channels to, look at it and damage the corset. And I say that because this corset actually has very little damage. We have a hole right up here, fairly large hole that looks like it's just been worn through. And then we have some of the binding that is coming off down here. That's really the only damage besides staining. So it's in frankly great condition. I guess the one other thing that you could consider damage is that this did once, as far as I can tell, have garter belts hanging from it, just elastic garter belts. You can see the remains of one right here, Also, same thing over here on this side. And I believe that right here in the center, these were also the garter belts, and they are no longer there. So that, I guess you could consider damage. Someone cut those off at some point. And then again, we have the binding coming off here. So let's take a look inside so that we can see how it is constructed. So you can see even from looking inside just really quite how flat this is. This was really meant to flatten your hips and not do that much else. But also you can see just how much boning is in here. So a lot of these are triple boning channels. So in the fronts, we've got 2 sets of triple boning channels, and then coming along to the side and the back, we have 3 sets of double boning channels, and then we've got 2 bones around the lacing right here with the grommets in the back. And all of these are just done, I believe, out of additional coutil, and they're just laid on top and stitched. So these are each separate pieces that are done on top. All of these double bone ones though, they are on what appears to be seams. So if we look at the outside here, and actually this triple one as well, if we look at the outside here, we can see there is a seam here, a seam here, a seam here, and a seam over here at the front. So all together we've got panel here, panel there, panel there, panel there, panel there, for a total of 5 panels on each side. So even though it is really quite a straight corset, it's still a lot of pieces because there is some shaping, particularly down here at the hips, that we need. And of course that doesn't count the gussets, elasticated gussets either. So looking back at the inside now, again, we have all of these just done as separate channels, and these are, I believe, on the bias because we can see where the join in the fabric is. So we've got like a bias join there, we've got one here, and those are joined on the bias, which most likely means that these are the bias as well, especially because you can kind of see the grain of the fabric taking that diagonal path. Over here in the back, we do have the lacing. These are all just small metal grommets. I'm guessing that they have changed color over time. I don't know what kind of metal this is, but you can see like this one, which I think may have actually been put in backwards, is still quite shiny, but the rest of these have really dulled almost to a blue color, which is kind of interesting, and they're a little bit on the rough side. The laces are just a very thin, I believe, cotton lace tape. And then they are done with like little plastic ends, just like shoelaces. And really they are rather like shoelaces, except I'd say thinner than your modern shoelace. But other than that, pretty similar. And again, they're very, very long. The corset is bound around top and bottom with more of the bias tape, though I believe this is a different bias tape because this has really kept its pink color here, whereas this has faded very much like the coutil itself. So, and it doesn't seem to be coutil. And actually looking at it further, I'm not sure that these are coutil either. So this may just be some sort of a manufactured bias tape, and same with down here. And then they did not put any tape over the gussets because otherwise, of course, you wouldn't be able to have that stretch that you get with the gussets up here. Interestingly enough, though, to bind off the top of these bones right here, because we don't have tape on there, it looks like it is just serged. I always love finding examples of kind of early serging before we tend to think about it, because sergers actually have been around for a really, really long time. I believe it's the 1800s. I don't remember exactly when, but yeah, so that is just serged right up there at the top to finish that up. And some of the important markings in here are, of course, we have a tag. So this is a Bon Ton corset made in the US, and Bon Ton was a subset of Royal, you're gonna kill me, I'm gonna butcher this word, Worcester, you know, the thing that looks like Worcester, but it's, I think, actually Worcester, Royal Worcester Corsets. And Royal Worcester Corsets was around for a long time. They did the whole Victorian corset era, everything, and they seem to have disappeared right around 1935. Going through ads and everything, I could not find a single ad for Royal Worcester Corsets after 1935. And this one in particular, this Bon Ton, this matches that ad that I had found and showed you earlier. That is 1922. That was also for Bon Ton corsets. Some of the other markings that we have down here, I believe that this is a style number and a size. So this is style 2205 or model 2205. I couldn't find 2205 in an actual ad, but I do believe that's what it is because each one had a numbered style, and each of the model numbers, they tended to be 3 to 4 digits, and similar to like 2205, you could see like 1035, etc. This is 32, which is why I believe that is the waist size, because we measured out a 32-inch waist size right here at the beginning. The other imprint on here is that we can tell that it's cotton, because right here it's been stamped with cotton. And frankly, I mean, we're talking about pretty simple construction here overall. I guess the only other things to note are that these panels right here where we have the boning channels, these are actually done like right sides together and turned so that the edge is encased in there, but you can see that there is actually a seam right in there, so it's been turned. Whereas on the front, they've literally just turned it over and then stitched down over here. So it's just folded part of the front and then stitched down. So that is something that's kind of interesting. The other thing that you can see is that there is probably some sort of like an interfacing in this front section. Possibly it's in the back as well. But since we are missing our tape right here, we can see that white in there. That looks like an interfacing or stabilizer. As far as some of those other construction details go, like how these seams were assembled, I believe that they were just assembled right sides together and then top stitched to create the boning channel, because when we pull this like up right on the edge, you can't get under there at all, which means that it would have had to been put right sides together first. If you could get under there, then that means that it's just top stitched, but this gives it more reinforcement to do both of those lines of stitching. And then likewise, we've also got some extra reinforcement stitches around where the gussets are, both up here and then also down here we get that extra line of stitching. And what that is doing is that it's holding the back in place underneath this tape. So they've edged this one with tape, this side, because there's no bones in it. By the way, all of these boning channels on the inside, they do continue past the point of the bones. So in the back, the bones go pretty much all the way to the bottom. We're missing maybe about an inch right here where there are no bones. But starting with the side, we have, that's probably more like 3.5 to 4 inches right here with no bones. And then it gets higher as it goes. So the bones in the front are actually pretty darn short. And I mean, you can see this is where the bones stop right here on sort of this like side front area. So we've got like 4.5 or 5 inches of no bones. And then even shorter on this one, we've got probably like 5.5 inches of no bones right here. And the interesting thing is that I feel like you can't really tell what is holding the bones in place. Like there's no definite row of stitching, you know, going across them or anything like that. You can't see it on either side. They just stop. So I'm not really sure how that is done, how they get it to not shift anywhere. My guess is that possibly this has been like fused in some way. The channel has been fused in some way to the coutil. And that could also be why there is this sort of wrinkling on here, that it could be as a result of fusing, but that still seems like an odd way to keep bones in place. I don't know if you know the answer to that, how they stop bones without doing any flossing or any stitching or anything like that on the bottom. Do let me know. These bones in the center front, they get a little bit longer, but only by like an inch or so. So we still have a good chunk down here with no bones in it. And then that's about the same length as the bust as well. So you can also see that it cuts away in the front to allow for you to do things like sit or go to the bathroom or, you know, whatever. So I think that's about it construction-wise on this corset. It's really pretty straightforward, but I think she's quite lovely, and it's nice to see something that would have been considered for a stout lady. I mean, I was very excited when I found this to, at the time, be in my size. And it was just fun to even just put on. You know, I never really wore it because I don't want to wear something that's 100 years old, but it's pretty darn cool. So just one other thing, I have now unlaced her to have about a 3.5 or 3.25 inch lacing gap, and the tails of the ties are now quite small. These are spaced only about 1 inch apart, all of the grommets, so there are a lot of grommets. It does take up the lace quite a bit, so really there's not as much wiggle room as I thought, and this probably would have been worn about a 2 or 3 inch lacing gap is my guess, 2.5, somewhere in there, but that is the corset. So as I kind of figured with the laces only being able to open really that far, this is way too small to put on either me or my regular dress form, and it is way too big, even when laced fully shut, to put on the dress form that I normally display my antiques on. Most of my antiques are below a 30-inch waist, so the fact that this is meant for like a 32 to 34-inch waist, really, I think it's pretty darn cool to have something of that size in my collection. So I do hope that you have enjoyed this video and enjoyed getting to take a look at this most likely early 1920s, say 1922 corset. And again, this is not something that was limited to stout ladies. Really, anyone who had any hips at all used a corset like this to help slim those hips and achieve that impossibly straight silhouette of the 1920s. And frankly, styles like this, they really did persist even through the 1930s, 1940s, 1950s. You just see them getting more elasticated and more synthetic materials used, so they wind up becoming very shiny and plasticky looking by the time you get into those 1950s girdles that I think all of us are a little bit more used to. But good old cotton in the 1920s, so I'm sure that they were at least breathing a lot more with their bodies than the ladies of the 1950s, or God forbid, the modern day ladies wearing those awful, awful Spanx. I don't know about you. I would much rather wear this than Spanx. Anyway, I do hope that you enjoyed this video and that you learned something new. If you liked this video, please go ahead and click the thumbs up icon. And if you'd like to see more videos like this from me, please go ahead and click subscribe and the little bell icon to be notified every time I post a new video. I do post videos here on YouTube twice a week, with my sewing vlogs out on Tuesdays and other costuming content like this out on Saturdays, but I post every day over on my Instagram, so please go follow me on Instagram. That's at Lady Rebecca Fashions. By the way, this is part of an ongoing series that I've been doing the entire time I've had a YouTube channel of examining antique garments. So do check the playlist down in the description if you want to see a whole lot of more antique garments dating all the way back to the 1860s. And if you'd like to help support my channel in other ways than by just viewing my videos, I do have a link to my Patreon and my Ko-fi down in the description below. I'd also like to give a humongous thank you to all of my wonderful patrons, and frankly all of you who have helped me out after this last video and with all the goings on, but I do want to especially thank all of my patrons at the Romantic, Victorian, and Edwardian level tiers, and they are Julie, Sharon, Ari, Audra, Emily, Jean, Kate, Maria, Mirage, Sarah, Tiffany, Bobby, Cherries, Denise, Elizabeth E, Elizabeth W, and I hope I'm not going to butcher your name, Mayanrad. Please do correct me if I say your name wrong, by the way. Again, thank you all so much for joining me today. Thank you to all my wonderful patrons. Thank you to all of you who have been supporting me. I hope you all have a wonderful, wonderful week, and I will see you very soon in my next video. Happy sewing!